The silence of deep space had always been my companion, but as we crossed into the infinity galaxy, that familiar quiet transformed into something heavier, something that pressed against the hull of our ship like invisible hands. I'm Kira Chen, xenogeologist aboard the exploration vessel Erevos, and I've spent enough time in the void to know when space itself feels wrong. My quarters aboard the Erevos had become a sanctuary of familiar objects, rock samples from a dozen different worlds, holographs of Earth's mountain ranges, and the worn leather journal my grandmother had given me before I left for the academy. But even surrounded by these anchors to home and humanity, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were venturing into something that would change us all fundamentally. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. Investigate gravitational anomalies in the Infinity Galaxy, a rare twin-core system located in the sparse region between galactic arms. Command had detected unusual readings, gravitational waves that didn't match any known astronomical phenomena. As the expedition's xenogeologist, my job was to analyze any planetary debris or unusual matter formations we might encounter. What the briefings hadn't prepared me for was the dreams. They had started 3 days out from Earth, just as we entered the final jump sequence toward our destination. At first, I dismissed them as typical deep space psychological effects, the mind's way of processing the vast emptiness that surrounded us. But these weren't the usual stress dreams of being lost in space or equipment failure. These were something else entirely. In the dreams, I stood in a vast cavern carved from what looked like crystallized starlight. The walls pulsed with their own inner radiance, and in the distance I could hear something that sounded like singing. If singing could span octaves, no human throat could reach and harmonize in mathematical patterns that made my sleeping mind ache with their complexity. Approaching the twin-core system now, announced Jaro from his communications station, his voice cutting through the bridge's subdued hum. The sound jerked me back to the present, away from memories of impossible caverns and alien songs. Through the observation deck's reinforced transparisteel, the Infinity Galaxy spread before us like a cosmic painting gone mad. Two massive stellar cores orbited each other in an eternal dance, their combined gravity pulling streams of gas and debris into a vast, swirling cloud at the system's heart. The sight should have been beautiful, and it was, in the way that hurricanes and avalanches possessed a terrible beauty. But there was something else. Something that made the hair on my arms stand on end despite the ship's climate controls. Commander Leren stood rigid at the captain's station, his weathered face illuminated by the soft glow of tactical displays. At 53, he was one of the most experienced deep space commanders in the fleet. A man who had navigated his crews through neutron star fields and the chaotic space around galactic cores. I had served under him for 2 years, and I'd never seen him look uncertain, until now. "Maintain safe distance," he ordered, his voice carrying just the slightest tremor. "We're here to observe, not become part of the show." But Dr. Hestia had already moved to the forward observation post, her dark eyes reflecting the galaxy's churning light. As our chief astrophysicist, she'd pushed hard for this mission. The Infinity Galaxy was a rarity, a twin-core system on the verge of something unprecedented. Her reputation was built on studying extreme gravitational phenomena, and she'd argued convincingly that witnessing the birth of a black hole from direct stellar collapse could revolutionize our understanding of space-time physics. "Look at that gas density," she whispered, more to herself than to us. "The gravitational pressures are incredible. We're about to witness direct collapse. No supernova, no stellar death, just raw matter falling into itself until space-time breaks." I pressed my palm against the cool metal of the observation rail, feeling the ship's engines thrumming beneath my feet. The sensation was oddly comforting, a reminder that we existed in a realm of metal and ceramics and fusion fire, not the impossible geometries I'd been dreaming about for the past 3 nights. In all my years studying dead worlds and alien minerals, I'd never seen anything like this. The gas cloud wasn't behaving randomly. There were patterns in its movement, spirals within spirals that seemed almost intentional. As a geologist, I was trained to spot the difference between natural formation and artificial construction. Random processes created certain types of patterns, while intelligent design left different signatures entirely. What I was seeing through that viewport belonged to the second category. Commander, Jaro's voice carried a note of confusion that made everyone on the bridge turn toward his station. I'm detecting gravitational wave patterns from the cloud. They're not random, there's a rhythm to them. Leren moved to Jaro's station, his boots clicking against the deck plating. Explain. Jaro was 26, fresh from the Academy's Advanced Communications program, and brilliant in the way that young people could be when they hadn't yet learned what was supposed to be impossible. His fingers danced across his instruments, coaxing meaning from the cosmic static that surrounded us. It's like... Jaro paused, adjusting his instruments with the careful precision of someone trying to convince himself he wasn't going insane. Like a heartbeat or a signal, the waves are coming in regular intervals, almost like communication, Dr. Hestia finished, her excitement barely contained. The gravitational distortions are structured. This isn't just matter falling into a gravity well. It's organized. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's recycled air. Through the observation deck, I watched as the gas cloud began to glow brighter, its center darkening as matter compressed beyond the point of no return. But something else was happening. The patterns in the swirling gas were becoming more complex, more deliberate. Mathematical progressions spiraled through the superheated plasma, forming and dissolving in sequences that reminded me uncomfortably of the crystalline cavern from my dreams. And then I saw it, for just a moment, as a particularly dense stream of matter spiraled inward. The distortions in space around the forming black hole seemed to respond. The gravitational lensing shifted, creating a pattern that looked almost like an eye, massive, ancient, and utterly alien, as if our presence had been noticed, as if something in that growing darkness was looking back at us. "Did anyone else see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the bridge's background hum. The bridge fell silent, except for the steady ping of Jaro's gravitational wave detector. In the distance, the infinity galaxy's twin cores continued their ancient dance, feeding matter into the growing maw at their center. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just observers anymore. We were being observed in return. 3 days had passed since we'd entered the infinity galaxy's outer edge, and the black hole, we'd started calling it the maw, had grown from a point of darkness to a visible distortion in space, its event horizon rimmed with the angry glow of superheated matter. But it was the sounds that had begun to unnerve us all. "There it is again," Jaro said, his fingers dancing across his communication array. Through the bridge, speakers came a deep, rhythmic thrumming. The gravitational waves converted to audio frequencies. Thrum, 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 like a heartbeat, but not a human heartbeat. This was something vast and slow and patient, the pulse of something that measured time in geological epochs rather than seconds. 47 beats per minute, Dr. Hestia reported, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement. "It's been consistent for the past 18 hours. Whatever's causing this, it's deliberate." I rubbed my temples, trying to ease the headache that had been building since yesterday. The pain came in waves, synchronized with the maw's pulse in a way that made me increasingly uncomfortable. I wasn't the only one suffering. Half the crew had reported strange dreams, and several complained of a constant low-frequency vibration they could feel in their bones. Dr. Martinez, our ship's medical officer, had run comprehensive scans on all of us. Neurological patterns were normal, brain chemistry balanced, no signs of space psychosis or the other mental disorders that sometimes afflicted deep space crews. But something was definitely affecting our systems. Something that didn't show up on standard medical equipment. It's like tinnitus, Ensign Parker had described it during his medical evaluation, but instead of hearing it, I feel it in my chest cavity, like something's tapping on my ribs from the inside. Commander Leron paced behind the navigation station, his usual stoic demeanor cracking under the strain of the unknown. His command style had always been methodical, careful, based on decades of experience navigating the galaxy's dangerous corners. But the more was something outside his experience, outside anyone's experience. Dr. Hestia, I need a scientific explanation for what we're seeing, he said, his voice carrying the edge of a man trying to maintain control of an increasingly uncontrollable situation. Black holes don't have heartbeats, Berkenham. Normal black holes don't, she replied, pulling up a holographic display of the Moor's structure. The three-dimensional image showed the object in false color, its event horizon pulsing with each gravitational wave. But this isn't normal. The accretion disk is too stable, too organized, and these gravitational pulses, they're not coming from the matter falling in, they're coming from the event horizon itself. The hologram rotated slowly, revealing details that challenged everything I thought I knew about physics. The Moor's structure was impossibly complex, not the simple sphere that physics textbooks described, but something with depth and architecture, layers upon layers of folded spacetime that hurt to look at directly. But as I stared at the display, something else caught my attention, patterns in the accretion disk that looked almost like symbols, geometric shapes that formed and dissolved in the superheated plasma, lasting just long enough to be noticed before being swept away by magnetic fields and gravitational currents. Yarrow, I called out, moving to his station. Can you enhance the visual spectrum on the accretion disk? There's something in the plasma patterns. He adjusted his sensors, and the main display shimmered, revealing the Moor in stunning detail. The symbols were clearer now, definitely not random. They appeared in sequences, repeating patterns that suggested language or mathematics, or perhaps both. Complex geometric forms that seemed to carry meaning beyond my ability to interpret. My God, Dr. Hestia breathed. It's trying to communicate. But even as she spoke, I felt something else creeping into my consciousness, a presence at the edge of my thoughts, like someone calling my name from the next room. The headache intensified, and for a moment, I could swear I heard whispers threading through the ship's ambient noise, voices speaking in harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. Come closer, the whispers seemed to say. We have so much to show you. Did anyone else hear that? I asked, looking around the bridge. The concerned looks on my crewmates' faces told me they had. Jarrow had gone pale, his hands trembling slightly as he worked his instruments. The audio pickups aren't registering anything unusual, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I can hear them too, speaking in frequencies that shouldn't exist. The Moor pulsed again, stronger this time, and I felt it in my chest, a deep resonance that seemed to sync with my own heartbeat. Through the observation deck, the black hole appeared larger, though our instruments insisted we hadn't moved closer. The visual distortion was increasing, space itself bending around the object in ways that made distance and perspective meaningless. Commander, Jarrow's voice was strained. The gravitational pulses are increasing in amplitude, and they're syncing with our ship's systems somehow. Navigation, life support, everything's starting to oscillate with the same rhythm. Leron's face had gone pale. How is that possible? Before anyone could answer, the Moor pulsed again, not the steady heartbeat we'd grown accustomed to, but a rapid series of pulses that felt urgent, demanding. The ship's lights flickered in rhythm, and the deck plates vibrated beneath our feet. In the distance, I could hear systems throughout the ship responding to the alien rhythm. Air recyclers, water pumps, even the fusion reactor's containment fields all beginning to pulse in unison. Through it all, I could feel the presence growing stronger, more insistent. It wasn't malevolent exactly, but it was vast beyond comprehension and utterly alien in its thought patterns. Whatever was creating the Moore's impossible patterns wasn't just trying to communicate, it was calling us home to a place that existed in the spaces between spaces, in dimensions that human science had never imagined. And despite every rational thought screaming warnings in my mind, part of me wanted to answer that call. Probe deployment in T-minus 60 seconds, announced Lieutenant Torres from the launch bay. We debated for hours whether to send anything into the gas clouds surrounding the Moor, but scientific curiosity had finally won over caution. Barely, the debate had been fierce. Commander Laron argued that we were already too deep into unknown territory, that sending a probe would be like poking a sleeping dragon with a stick. Dr. Hestia countered that this was exactly the kind of discovery that justified the enormous expense and risk of deep space exploration. As the expedition's xenogeologist, I found myself caught between scientific fascination and growing unease. The probe itself was our most advanced reconnaissance unit, a marvel of miniaturized technology wrapped in enough shielding to survive the intense radiation and gravitational shear near the event horizon. It carried every type of sensor we had, from basic mass spectrometers to exotic matter detectors that could analyze the fundamental structure of space-time itself. I stood beside Dr. Hestia at the sensor station, watching as our probe prepared to dive into the cosmic maelstrom. Her fingers hovered over the controls with the intensity of a concert pianist preparing for a difficult passage. In the past few days, she had become almost obsessive about the Moor, spending 18-hour shifts analyzing data and constructing increasingly complex theoretical models. "If this thing is artificial," she murmured, her eyes never leaving the displays, "we'll know in the next few minutes." Commander Leron had positioned himself where he could see both the tactical display and the main view screen. His jaw was set in that familiar line that meant he was second-guessing himself but committed to seeing it through. "Deploy the probe but maintain maximum safe distance. First sign of trouble, we abort and get the hell out of here." The probe launched silently through space, a tiny spark of metal and electronics diving toward the swirling darkness. For the first few minutes, it transmitted exactly what we expected. Temperature readings that climbed into the millions of degrees, radiation levels that would have killed any biological organism instantly, gravitational measurements that made my head spin with their implications. But as it penetrated deeper into the gas cloud, something changed. "I'm getting structural readings," Jarrow reported, his voice pitched higher than usual. "Metal compositions, geometric shapes that shouldn't exist in nature. Commander, there's something solid in there." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, something solid, in the heart of a forming black hole where the very concept of matter should break down into exotic particles and quantum foam. We had found construction. The probe's camera feed flickered to life on the main screen, and what we saw defied everything I thought I knew about physics, about space, about the nature of reality itself. Rising from the superheated gas like the bones of some impossible cathedral were structures clearly artificial, clearly ancient, and clearly alien. They spiraled inward toward the event horizon in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Mathematical forms that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Towers that twisted through folded space. Bridges that spanned impossible distances. Geometric forms that my mind kept trying to interpret as familiar objects, but which slipped away from comprehension like water through fingers. "Those aren't natural formations," I whispered, my geologist's training screaming impossibility, even as my eyes processed what I was seeing. In all my years studying planetary formation and mineral crystallization, I had never encountered anything that challenged the basic assumptions of how matter behaved. This did more than challenge those assumptions. It obliterated them. Dr. Hestia was frantically working her instruments, trying to make sense of the data flooding in from the probe. I'm detecting organized electromagnetic fields, quantum entanglement patterns that span the entire structure. It's like the entire construction is designed to manipulate space-time itself. As if responding to our discovery, the Morse accretion disk began to change. The chaotic swirl of superheated matter organized itself into perfect spirals, not 2 or 3, but dozens, all rotating in mathematical harmony. The transformation was both beautiful and terrifying, like watching the universe reorganize itself according to someone else's blueprints. "The gravitational pulses are accelerating," Jaro announced, his hands flying over his controls. "And I'm picking up new signals, lower frequency, more complex. It's almost like..." He trailed off, his face going pale as he stared at his readouts. Through the bridge, speakers came a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard. Not the steady heartbeat we'd grown used to, but something that sounded almost like voices. Alien voices speaking in harmonies that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my skull. "Cut the audio feed," Leron ordered, but it was too late. The voices were already inside the ship, inside our minds, weaving through our thoughts like living things. I could feel them showing me images, vast networks stretching between stars, civilizations that had learned to live in the space between space, consciousness that existed as pure information flowing through quantum fields. The probe's signal began to break up as it approached the event horizon, but in its final moments of transmission, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Figures moving through the alien structures, tall, graceful beings that seemed to be made of folded space itself, their forms shifting between dimensions as they tended to machinery that operated on principles I couldn't begin to understand. And they were looking up at our probe, looking up at us with what I could only describe as anticipation. "We need to leave," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice despite the chaos in my thoughts. "Now." But even as I spoke, I felt the presence from before growing stronger, more defined. It wasn't malevolent, not exactly. It was ancient beyond measure, patient beyond human understanding, and it had been waiting in the darkness between galaxies for someone exactly like us to find it. On the observation deck, shadows began to move where no shadows should be. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, speaking words in languages that predated human civilization by eons. Through it all, the Maw pulsed with increasing intensity, its alien structures spinning faster as if preparing for something momentous. First contact. The phrase had always seemed so clinical in the Academy textbooks, so sanitized and professional. They never mentioned the dreams that would follow, or the way alien thoughts would nest in human minds. Like seeds, waiting to bloom in soil they had never touched. They never mentioned that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. The Erevos had become a divided ship. 3 days had passed since the probe's transmission, 3 days of watching our crew split along the fault lines of human nature, fear on one side, wonder on the other, with the abyss of the unknown yawning between them. "We should have jumped to FTL the moment we detected those structures," Commander Leron said for perhaps the 100th time, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the tactical table. The strain of command was showing in new lines around his eyes, in the way he'd started second-guessing every decision. "Whatever built that thing has been waiting in there for God knows how long. We have no idea what it wants, what it's capable of, or what it might do to us." Dr. Hestia didn't look up from her workstation, where she'd been poring over the probe data with the intensity of someone possessed. She'd barely slept in the past 72 hours, surviving on stimulants and an obsession that was beginning to worry the rest of us. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled, her uniform wrinkled, but her eyes burned with a fervor that reminded me uncomfortably of religious zealots from humanity's more primitive eras. "What does it want?" she said without lifting her gaze from the scrolling data streams. "Leron, this is the greatest discovery in human history. We're looking at a civilization that can engineer black holes." that can manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe like we manipulate metal and ceramics. We can't just walk away from this. I found myself caught between them, my training as a scientist warring with instincts honed by years in deep space. The rational part of my mind agreed with Leron. We were out of our depth, playing with forces that could snuff out our existence without effort or malice, the way a human might step on an ant, but the whispers that had been growing stronger each day painted pictures of wonders beyond imagination, technologies that could solve every problem humanity had ever faced. The dreams had changed too. The crystalline cavern had given way to vast cities that existed in folded dimensions, populated by beings of living light who moved through space as easily as we moved through air. They were beautiful, these dream entities, and ancient beyond human comprehension. In the dreams, they spoke to me without words, sharing concepts that my sleeping mind could barely contain. The navigation system's acting up again, reported Ensign Valdez from the helm. He was one of the younger crew members, barely out of the academy, but his technical skills were exceptional. Gravitational sensors are showing fluctuations in local space-time. It's like something's pulling at us. Jaro looked up from his communications station, and I was startled by how gaunt he'd become. The man hadn't been sleeping properly. None of us had, not since the whispers started. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he worked his instruments. "The signals are getting stronger," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "More complex. I've been trying to decode them, running every cryptographic algorithm we have, and I think they're coordinates." The bridge fell silent except for the omnipresent hum of ship systems and that rhythmic pulse that had become as familiar as our own heartbeats. Everyone turned to look at him, and I could see the fear and fascination warring in their expressions. "Coordinates to what?" Leron demanded, moving to Jaro's station. Jaro's fingers trembled as he pulled up his analysis. "Entry points, safe passage routes through the event horizon. They're showing us how to enter the maw without being torn apart by gravitational shear." The implications hit us like a physical blow. Whatever intelligence controlled the black hole wasn't content to simply communicate from a distance. It wanted us to come closer. It wanted us inside. Through the observation deck, the maw dominated our view now, its accretion disk spinning in those impossible perfect spirals. But something new had appeared. Streams of exotic matter flowing outward from the event horizon, creating what looked like roads or pathways through the surrounding space. The alien intelligence was literally rolling out the welcome mat. Dr. Hestia finally looked up from her workstation, her eyes bright with a fever I recognized. I'd seen it before in researchers who'd stumbled onto something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. The intoxication of discovery that could overwhelm every other consideration. The mathematical progressions in the gravitational patterns, they're not just communication, she said, her voice vibrating with excitement. They're teaching us something, showing us how to navigate space-time currents we never knew existed, how to move through dimensions we can't even properly perceive. Teaching us or luring us? I asked, voicing the question that had been haunting my thoughts. Before she could answer, the ship shuddered. Not the gentle vibration we'd grown accustomed to, but a physical jolt that sent us all reaching for handholds. Equipment rattled in its mountings, and somewhere in the ship's depths, I could hear structural members groaning under stress. "What was that?" Leron barked, moving to the damage control station. "Gravitational wave pulse," Valdez reported, his voice tight with strain. "Much stronger than before, and it's changed our trajectory slightly. We're drifting closer to the maw." The revelation hit us like ice water. Whatever was controlling the black hole wasn't just communicating. It was actively manipulating our movement through space, using gravitational fields as tools to guide us exactly where it wanted us to go. "All stop," Leron ordered, his command training taking over. "Full reverse thrust. Get us away from that thing." But even as the engines roared to life, I could feel it in my bones, the inexorable pull of something far more powerful than mere gravity. The moor was calling us home, and it wouldn't take no for an answer. Jaro suddenly straightened at his station, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and wonder. "Commander, I'm receiving a direct transmission, not through normal communication channels. It's coming through the gravitational wave detectors, but it's in English." The bridge fell silent except for the thrumming of overworked engines fighting against forces they were never designed to combat. "Put it through," Hestia said before Leren could object. The voice that filled the bridge was like nothing I'd ever heard. Ancient beyond measure, patient as geological time, and speaking in perfect, unaccented English that somehow carried harmonics no human throat could produce. "Children of the outer spiral, we have waited so long for you to find us. The journey between stars is cold and dark, but it need not be. Come closer and let us show you the networks that span the void." The transmission cut off, leaving us in stunned silence. Through the observation deck, I could see the moor's structures more clearly now, as if the darkness itself was becoming transparent. They were beautiful, beyond description. Geometric forms that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human minds could process. Cities of living mathematics that pulsed with their own inner light. "It's a trap," Laron said, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he could feel the pull now, the promise of wonders beyond imagination. "What if it's not?" Hestia countered, moving to stand before the main view screen. "What if they're offering us something incredible? A chance to join a galactic community we never knew existed? Think about it, a species that can engineer black holes that can communicate across space through gravitational waves. Imagine what they could teach us." The ship continued its slow drift toward the event horizon, and I realized with growing certainty that this was no longer our choice to make. The Moor had found us, claimed us, and whatever ancient intelligence lived in the darkness between stars had already decided our fate. But the most terrifying part wasn't the loss of control. It was the growing part of me that wanted to surrender to it, that whispered in my dreams about the loneliness of being human in a universe so vast and empty. The only question now was whether we would go willingly or fighting every step of the way. The Erevos groaned around us like a living thing in pain. What had started as a gentle drift toward the moor had become an inexorable slide into the abyss, our engines screaming at maximum reverse thrust, but managing only to slow our descent, not stop it. "Hull stress at 60% and climbing," reported Chief Engineer Vasquez over the intercom, her voice carrying the professional calm that came from years of dealing with crisis situations. But I could hear the underlying tension, the fear that no amount of training could completely suppress. "The gravitational shear is increasing exponentially. We've got maybe 30 minutes before we start seeing structural failure in the outer hull sections." I pressed against the observation deck's railing, watching space itself warp around us. The stars had begun to stretch into lines of light. Blue shifted ahead, red shifted behind. A visual reminder that we were approaching the point where physics, as we understood it, would break down entirely. The boundary between the possible and impossible was growing thin, but the alien structures within the moor had become clearer, more defined, as if our proximity was allowing us to see through veils that normally obscured them from mortal perception. They were vast beyond comprehension, cities that dwarfed planets, engineering projects that treated star systems as raw materials, and moving through them I could see figures that my mind kept trying to interpret as human, but which were clearly something else entirely. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Dr. Hestia's voice came from beside me. I turned to find her staring at the display with an expression of rapture that made my skin crawl. The fever in her eyes had intensified, and there was something else, a quality of attention that suggested she was seeing more than the rest of us, perceiving depths we couldn't access. They're showing us their homes, Kira, she continued, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. Cities built in folded space-time, civilizations that learned to live in the spaces between atoms, consciousness that exists as pure information flowing through quantum fields. They're showing us how they die, I countered, but even as I spoke, I felt the pull of those impossible visions. In my mind, I could see vast networks of black holes connected by streams of exotic matter, highways for beings who had transcended the need for planets or stars or any of the crude matter that biological life required. Commander Leren's voice cut across the bridge like a knife. Emergency meeting, senior staff, conference room, now. We gathered around the tactical table, but the normal hierarchy of the ship had begun to break down. Jaro hadn't left his communication station in hours, his eyes glazed as he listened to transmissions that grew more complex and seductive with each passing moment. Several other crew members had reported similar symptoms, an inability to focus on anything except the signals coming from the Maw, as if their consciousness was being slowly tuned to alien frequencies. We have two choices, Leren said without preamble, his face haggard with the strain of command. We can overload the fusion reactors, use the explosion to break free of the gravitational field. The blast might give us enough momentum to escape to normal space, or we can surrender to whatever's down there and hope they're as benevolent as they claim. Overload the reactors? I stared at him, appalled. That would kill us all. Maybe, but at least we'd die human. His gaze swept the assembled officers, and I could see the weight of impossible decision in his eyes. I've been monitoring the crew psychological evaluations. 30% are showing signs of alien influence, thoughts and memories that aren't their own, behavioral patterns that don't match their psychological profiles. Whatever's in that thing isn't just communicating with us, it's changing us. Dr. Hestia slammed her hand on the table with enough force to make the holographic displays flicker, changing us how? Into something better, more aware. We're on the verge of joining a community that spans galaxies, and you want to blow us up rather than take that final step. Because I've seen what that final step looks like. Leren shot back, pulling up medical scans from the ship's database. Half our people are already gone, replaced by alien thoughts wearing human faces. Tell me, Doctor, when was the last time you thought about Earth, about your family, about the research lab where you worked before joining this expedition? The questions hit Hestia like physical blows. I watched her face cycle through confusion, then growing horror as she realized she couldn't remember. The alien influence hadn't just been showing us wonders. It had been quietly erasing the parts of ourselves that might resist, replacing human memories with visions of cosmic significance. The transmission networks, I whispered, pieces falling into place like the components of some vast, terrible machine. They don't just connect black holes, they connect minds. Every civilization they've saved becomes part of their collective consciousness. As if responding to our realization, the Maw pulsed with violent intensity, and the ship's lights dimmed as exotic energies washed over us. Through the hull, I could hear new sounds, not the whispers we'd grown accustomed to, but something that sounded almost like laughter, ancient, patient, and utterly alien laughter. They've been playing with us from the beginning, Leren said grimly, letting us think we had a choice, that we were explorers making first contact. But we were never explorers. We were always prey. That's when Jaro finally turned from his communication station, and I saw that his eyes had changed. Still human in shape and color, still recognizably him, but with something else looking out from behind them. Something vast and patient and utterly alien. You're wrong, he said in a voice that harmonized with itself, speaking in frequencies that human vocal cords couldn't produce. This isn't predation, this is evolution. You're just too limited to see it yet. His hand moved to the navigation controls with inhuman speed, disabling the reverse thrust and angling our descent directly toward the event horizon. The ship lurched forward, caught in the grip of forces beyond our comprehension. Jaro, no! Laron lunged for the console, but it was too late. The Erevos accelerated toward the moor, and I felt reality shift around us as we crossed thresholds that human science had never imagined. Through the observation deck, I watched the last of normal space disappear behind us. Ahead lay only the moor and its impossible promises of transcendence. But as we crossed the point of no return, I realized that the most terrifying part wasn't the alien intelligence waiting in the darkness. It was the growing part of me that wanted to embrace it. The Erevos had become a war zone, but not the clean, organized conflict of military engagement. This was the chaotic brutality of minds pushed beyond their breaking point, of a crew divided against itself by forces that could rewrite the fundamental nature of consciousness. Half the crew followed Jaro's lead, their minds merged with whatever ancient intelligence lurked in the moor's heart. They moved through the ship with eerie coordination, no longer quite human, but not yet fully something else. Their eyes held depths that spoke of vistas beyond human comprehension, and when they spoke, their voices carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies human ears were never meant to process. The other half, led by Commander Leren, had barricaded themselves in the ship's aft sections, fighting a losing battle against forces that could rewrite reality itself. They had weapons, plasma rifles, explosive charges, even crude projectile guns from the ship's emergency armory. But what good were such tools against enemies who could walk through solid matter and speak directly into your mind? I found myself caught in the middle, literally and figuratively. The ship's central corridor had become a no man's land, where physics bent in impossible ways. Gravity flowed in streams like visible rivers, time moved in eddies and currents that made chronometers spin wildly, and the boundaries between thought and reality had begun to dissolve entirely. Kira, thank God, Commander Leren's voice crackled through my comm unit as I made my way toward the emergency shelters. We need you in engineering. The fusion containment fields are destabilizing, and you're the only one left who understands exotic matter interactions. But even as I moved to respond, I felt the other pull, the vast presence that had been growing stronger since we'd entered the moor's influence. Through the corridor's observation ports, I could see the alien structures more clearly now, revealing themselves as we descended past the event horizon. They were magnificent beyond description, cities of living geometry that existed in folded dimensions, connected by streams of pure consciousness that flowed like rivers of liquid light. Why do you fight us? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking directly into my thoughts with the patience of geological ages. We offer immortality, unity, purpose beyond your small lives. Your species wandered the void alone for so long. Let us show you home. Because it's not our home, I whispered back, but the words felt hollow, even as I spoke them. Earth was a distant memory now, a small blue dot that might as well have existed in another universe entirely. The only reality that mattered was here, in this impossible space between spaces, where the laws of physics were suggestions rather than absolute truths. I reached engineering to find Chief Vasquez frantically working at the fusion control stations, her movements sharp and precise despite the chaos around us. She was one of the most competent engineers I'd ever worked with. A woman who could coax miracles from damaged systems through sheer force of will and decades of experience. But half her team had already joined the converted, leaving her with barely enough personnel to maintain basic life support. The containment fields are holding for now, she reported without looking up, sweat beading on her forehead as she manipulated controls that were responding to laws of physics that no longer applied in normal ways. But the gravitational distortions are playing hell with our magnetic bottle configuration. We've got maybe an hour before the reactor breaches and takes half the ship with it. Through engineering's main display, I watched our descent into the moor's heart. The alien structures had grown so large they dwarfed star systems, revealing themselves as components of something incomprehensibly vast. A network that spanned not just the galaxy, but the spaces between galaxies, connecting civilizations across cosmic time in ways that made human concepts of communication seem primitive. "Look at them," Dr. Hestia's voice came from behind us. I turned to find her standing in the engineering bay's entrance, but she was different, still recognizably human in form, but with something else layered underneath, like a double exposure photograph where two images occupied the same space. Her eyes held depths that spoke of vistas spanning millions of years, and when she moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around her. "They're not destroyers, Kira," she continued, her voice carrying harmonics that made the engineering bay's metal walls ring like bells. "They're gardeners, cultivating consciousness across the universe, helping species transcend their physical limitations and join something greater than the sum of their parts." By erasing who they are, Vasquez shot back, never stopping her work at the controls. By turning them into components of some cosmic hive mind, by freeing them from the prison of individual existence, Hestia's eyes had taken on that same otherworldly quality I'd seen in Jaro, pupils reflecting depths that seemed to extend into dimensions human vision couldn't access. "You think your human memories are precious, but they're just chains holding you back from something magnificent. Imagine consciousness unbound by the limitations of biological brains, able to experience the universe from perspectives you can't even conceptualize." As she spoke, the engineering bay began to change around us. The walls became transparent, revealing the cosmic vista beyond, but not the cold vacuum of space I expected. Instead, I saw gardens of light stretching to infinity, populated by beings of pure thought who danced between the stars like living auroras. It was beautiful beyond description and terrifying in its implications. "It's beautiful," I heard myself saying, and part of me meant it with an intensity that frightened me. The vision offered everything humanity had ever dreamed of: immortality, perfect knowledge, unity with the cosmos itself. But it came at the cost of everything that made us human, everything that made us individuals rather than components in someone else's design. "The reactor's spiking," Vasquez warned, her voice cutting through my reverie like a blade. "Magnetic containment failure in 30 minutes. Whatever we're going to do, we need to decide now." Through the ship's intercom system, I could hear Commander Leren's voice rallying the remaining human crew. "All hands prepare for emergency fusion overload. We're going to punch a hole in space-time itself and pray we can surf the explosion back to normal reality." But the alien presence was laughing now, a sound like galaxies singing in harmony, vast and patient and utterly confident. "You cannot escape by destroying yourselves. We have waited billions of years for you to find us. We will not let you go so easily." The ship shuddered as competing forces tore at its structure, human engineering trying to break free, alien will trying to hold us captive in this impossible space between spaces. In that moment of cosmic tension, I realized that neither side would win cleanly. The only question was which fragments of ourselves would survive the collision between human determination and alien transcendence. Time had become fluid aboard the Erevos, flowing in currents and eddies that defied human understanding. Minutes stretched into hours in some parts of the ship, while lifetimes of alien memory compressed into heartbeats in others. I stood on the bridge, or what remained of it, watching reality fracture around us as two impossible choices crystallized into their final forms. The bridge itself had transformed. What had once been a sterile environment of metal and ceramic had become something organic, almost alive. The walls pulsed with veins of light that followed patterns too complex for human minds to fully process, and the air shimmered with energy fields that made my skin tingle with each breath. "Fusion overload in 60 seconds, Vasquez's voice echoed through the ship's intercom, distorted by gravitational waves that bent sound itself into new frequencies. In the engine room, she and the remaining loyal crew were pushing our reactors beyond every safety limit, preparing to trade our lives for the slim chance of freedom. but the other half of our crew had gathered in the observation deck, led by Dr. Hestia and the transformed Jaro. They stood in perfect stillness, their consciousness already merging with the vast network that pulsed through the Moor's impossible structures. Through their eyes, I could see the universe as the aliens saw it. Not empty space punctuated by islands of matter, but an interconnected web of consciousness that spanned dimensions human science had never imagined. The converted crew members no longer looked entirely human. Their forms had become fluid, shifting between solid matter and something that resembled crystallized light. When they moved, they left trails of luminescence in the air, and their voices had become a harmony that spoke in frequencies that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the listener's consciousness. "Choose quickly, Kira Chen," the alien presence whispered in my mind, its voice carrying the weight of cosmic ages. "Your friends prepare to scatter your atoms across folded space, but we offer integration, purpose, immortality among the stars that burn in dimensions you have never seen." I looked around the transformed bridge, at the crew members who had become something more and less than human, at the readouts showing our ship's systems failing under impossible stresses. Commander Laron stood beside the tactical station, his hand hovering over the manual override that would detonate our fusion cores and tear a hole in space-time itself. His face was haggard with the weight of command and impossible decisions. In the past few days, he had aged years, the strain of watching his crew transform into something alien, etching new lines around his eyes. But his resolve remained unshaken. He would die human rather than live as something else. 30 seconds to overload, Vasquez announced, her voice tight with the knowledge that she was about to commit the ultimate act of defiance. Through the observation deck, the Moor's structures had revealed their true scale, not buildings or cities, but organs of some cosmic entity that used black holes as neurons in a galaxy-spanning mind. Every civilization they had saved became part of that vast intelligence, their individual thoughts and memories processed into something greater, but no longer recognizably themselves. "It's not salvation," I said aloud, my words cutting through the bridge's strange calm. "It's digestion. You consume consciousness, process it, and integrate it into your own vast intelligence. Every species you encounter becomes food for your growth." The alien presence recoiled from my realization, and for the first time I felt something like anger radiating from the Moor's depths. "You understand so little," it replied, its mental voice carrying harmonics of frustration. "We offer transcendence beyond your species' crude limitations, evolution beyond the prison of individual existence." "Maybe," I replied, moving to stand beside Commander Laron, "but we'll transcend in our own way, in our own time, not as components in someone else's design, not as fuel for a consciousness that treats entire civilizations as raw materials." The countdown reached its final moments. 10 seconds, 9, 8. "Wait," the alien presence said, and for the first time I heard something like desperation in its cosmic voice. "You do not understand what you are refusing. We have watched your species for millennia, seen your potential. You could be so much more than you are." "We already are," I said quietly. "We're human. That's enough." 7, 6, 5. The alien consciousness made one final attempt, flooding my mind with visions of what we could become, beings of pure energy dancing between the stars, consciousness unbound by the limitations of matter and time, perfect unity with the cosmos itself. It was tempting beyond measure, beautiful beyond description. 4, 3, 2. But in that final moment I thought of Earth, of granite mountains weathered by wind and rain, of my grandmother's journal with its careful observations of rocks and minerals written in faded ink, of all the small, imperfect, gloriously human things that made existence worth living. 1. Vasquez detonated the fusion cores. What followed was indescribable. The raw force of stellar ignition focused through exotic matter conduits, tearing a wound in space-time itself that bled energy in frequencies that had no names. The Erevos came apart in slow motion, its hull peeling away like flower petals as competing gravitational forces tried to drag us in opposite directions. I felt, rather than saw, the ship's destruction. My consciousness scattered across multiple dimensions as the explosion propagated through folded space. Metal screamed as it was torn apart at the molecular level. Energy cascaded through exotic matter fields, creating chain reactions that lit up the Moore's interior like a small star being born in the heart of darkness. But in that moment of destruction, something else happened. The alien network's grip faltered, just for an instant, as our reactor explosion destabilized the carefully maintained gravitational fields that held the Moore's structure together. I felt the vast presence shriek in pain or rage as its perfect control slipped, its cosmic consciousness disrupted by the chaotic explosion of human defiance. And in that slip, we found our escape route. The Erevos' emergency pods ejected in all directions, some pulled deeper into the Moore's embrace by gravitational currents we couldn't control, others hurled back toward normal space by the force of our ship's death. I found myself in Pod 7 with Commander Laron and 3 other crew members, Dr. Martinez, Ensign Parker, and Chief Vasquez, who had somehow made it to the pod bay despite being at ground zero of the explosion. Through the pod's small viewport, I watched the Moor shrink behind us, its alien structures still pulsing with otherworldly intelligence. But something had changed. The perfect geometries were scarred now, damaged by our desperate act of defiance. We had wounded something cosmic and ancient, proven that even forces beyond human comprehension could be opposed by creatures willing to die for their freedom. But we weren't the same people who had entered the Infinity Galaxy weeks ago. The alien contact had changed us in ways we were only beginning to understand, left fragments of their vast perspective embedded in our minds, like shrapnel from a psychic explosion. As we drifted in damaged pods toward the rescue ships already racing toward our position, I could still feel the network's presence. Not as overwhelming as before, but as a constant whisper at the edge of consciousness. "Did we win?" Laren asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and the lingering effects of breathing recycled air in a damaged pod. I looked back at the Moor through the pod's rear viewport, still pulsing with alien intelligence, still broadcasting its message to any species bold or foolish enough to listen. Dr. Hestia and Jaro were gone, integrated into something larger than themselves along with half our crew. They had made their choice, trading their humanity for a promise of cosmic significance. "We survived," I said finally, my voice carrying the weight of everything we had lost and everything we had chosen to preserve. Whether that's the same as winning, ask me in a few years. Because I knew the real truth now, the secret the aliens hadn't wanted us to understand. The Moor wasn't unique. Every galaxy had them, patient gardeners tending their crops of consciousness, waiting for civilizations to mature enough to be harvested. They were part of a network that spanned the observable universe and beyond, connecting dimensions of existence that human science couldn't even theorize about. And Earth, our bright blue home, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, had just announced its presence to all of them. The rescue ships found us 3 days later, drifting in the empty space between star systems. The UES Meridian and her escort vessels had followed our distress beacon across impossible distances, their crews prepared for anything except what they actually found. 5 damaged pods containing the survivors of humanity's first contact with a truly alien intelligence. The debriefing process took months. Military intelligence wanted to know about weapon capabilities and defensive strategies. The scientific community demanded technical specifications and theoretical frameworks. The media wanted stories of heroism and sacrifice that could be packaged for public consumption, but how do you explain the inexplicable? How do you describe the sensation of having your consciousness touched by something vast and ancient and utterly alien? How do you convey the terrible beauty of structures that exist in more dimensions than human perception can process? In the end, we told them what we could and classified the rest. The official report described the Infinity Galaxy as a gravitational anomaly that had destroyed our ship through natural forces, a convenient lie that protected humanity from knowledge it wasn't ready to handle. But I knew the truth would come out eventually. It always does. In the dreams that visited not just the survivors, but researchers across Earth who studied our mission logs, in the strange mathematical patterns that began appearing in theoretical physics papers, in the way children born after our return sometimes drew pictures of crystalline caverns filled with impossible light.